Okay, selamat malam semua. Welcome to Gerak Budaya, and I'd like to thank you for spending your Friday night with us here. So my name is Aiman Farihah from Pemuda Sosialis, and I'll be your moderator tonight for this very timely and urgent forum. So as you all know, this year Malaysia is holding the ASEAN Chairmanship, right? So that means Malaysia holds a very significant responsibility in setting the theme as well as leading the path or like guiding what ASEAN should prioritize and work on. So the theme for ASEAN 2025 this year is inclusivity and sustainability, which also translates into keterangkuman dan kemampanan in Malay, which focuses on enhancing economic resilience, shared prosperity, and improving the well-being of the people, which is particularly relevant to today's complex global environment. Sounds good, right? But the big question is, how do we make sure that these nice words actually mean something to the ordinary people like you and me, and also people across the region? So before we dive in, I would like to just throw a little history lesson to you all about the history of ASEAN. So ASEAN was started in the 1976 was started during Cold War. So that time there was a lot of tension. So it was by these 5 countries who were like, let's not fight with each other. Let's be friends and let's brainstorm on how we can make a better ASEAN, and also to kind of like improve the education and also the disaster response that was happening at that time. So, but let's be real right now, the world is pretty messy. We've got trade tensions between the US and China. We are staring down at climate breakdown and job problems among the youth. Though ASEAN is projected to become the world's 4th largest economy by 2030, which sounds great, but why are the people not feeling the benefits? So tonight's forum is all about this big question. How do we move from a top-down ASEAN to one that is truly people-centered? One that puts economic resilience, which especially for workers and marginalized groups, and one that cares about shared prosperity and actually listens to people's voices. And how do we make ASEAN work for all of us? How do we build stronger solidarity across region? And how do we create an economy that serves everyone and not just a few? So tonight we've got an amazing panel to dive into all of this with us. So I'd like to invite Saudara Azlan Awang, Tian, Chua, and Dr. Jeyakumar on the stage to join us. Everyone is comfortable, huh? Okay. All right, join us tonight. We have 3 powerful, brilliant minds who bring experience from activism, research, and policy making. So first off, we have Azlan Awang in the house, who is a chief researcher at Majelis Tindakan Ekonomi Melayu, a senior fellow of the Malay Chamber of Commerce, who's a co-founder of Blindspot, which is an economic think tank, and was a leading member of the anti-TPPA movement. And next we have Tian, who is a former MP of Batu. He's also involved in reformasi since 1998 and currently the spokesperson for the Secretariat Solidarity Palestine. And lastly, none other, we have Dr. Jeyakumar, who is the chairperson of Parti Sosialis Malaysia, former MP of Sungai Siput, and key mover in the coalition against health privatization. So let's start by grounding ourselves in today's realities. So the politics, the economy, and how people are really doing across ASEAN. So let's begin with someone who's been watching the economy shifts very closely, Azlan Awang. So I'd like to ask, what's your read on ASEAN's current path, and where is it heading under Malaysia's leadership this year?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening to all. Thank you, PSM, for inviting me to participate in this forum tonight. What is the past of ASEAN? That's your question. I always wondered sometimes how ASEAN managed to keep intact, because it's so diverse, and the reason it was formed in the 70s, as you said, right, in the 70s, it was because of the Cold War. Right? I think the countries wanted security, they wanted some kind of a bloc to ensure or to resist the domino effect of the Cold War coming down from Vietnam. So they formed that, and later on, I think in the 80s, 90s, it became a trade bloc. Because it's so diverse in terms of its economic strength. How much time are you giving me? Okay. All right. I think the fact that ASEAN as a trade bloc, we have access to it, I think it's a good thing. Right? Because if we were to refer to the United Nations Conference on Trade Development, UNCTAD, in the post the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, there was a report in 2013, they call it the TDR 2013. They concluded in a very nice way. They're saying that post the financial crisis, the export-led growth doesn't work anymore. The old strategies doesn't work anymore. Right? We cannot be relying on the conventional market of the advanced promise. So they recommended that we should focus more on the vicinity market. That would be ASEAN, the vicinity market, our neighbors, and also to focus also on South-South trade. And according to UNCTAD, UNCTAD is the monitor trade and development of third world countries. In particular, the global growth, they say, right, is driven by the South-South trade. So I think we're on the right track if we're going to be pivoting on ASEAN as a. But what is beyond that? I think beyond that is not much. And if we look at the disparity between the 10 countries, right? Singapore being the most dominant. And I think the real benefits of ASEAN actually go to Singapore only. This is what I feel like, because for instance, the latest agreement that's going to be is already being concluded now, probably to be signed at the end of this year, which is the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, was practically drafted by Singapore, right? And we had discussions within the Batak TPPA community, and we are concerned about it because in particular things like the provisions chapters on digital economy in the CPTPP, for instance, right? All the advanced countries, they have all the proper regulations in place. We don't even know what's going to be the future of the digital economy. And ours is, there some basic framework, but they're very, very still primitive. And we will not be ready for the new things that's coming. They are, right? Now, similarly, the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, what it's going to be like, we don't know. But anyway, I feel that there should be more collective actions by ASEAN. For instance, this Trump tariff problem. Vietnam has unilaterally declared that they're going to zero-rise all the tariffs as far as they and US are concerned, right? But what are the rest of the ASEAN countries doing? I mean, we should be collectively, pursuing the matter, negotiating with the US on a collective basis. But I don't think so. I don't think we are doing that because there's just Malaysia as chairman also. I don't think we have that much clout to organize that. So I think everybody is going to go about their way. And of course, when you are disunited, I mean, similarly, things like the EU deforestation regulation, UDR, I think we are going up way also. As Indonesia going their way, right? I don't think we're going to get the best of things lah. So benda-benda macam ni yang kita not really, ASEAN has not been a good platform to work collectively. Same thing like the ESG and whatnot. But there are areas where we can work collective, on the economic side, for instance. Things like, for instance, we're importing a lot of goods and machineries and whatnot, which has got high IP content, right? High IP content, which we can actually, it's no more, is all the patents are gone already. We can actually do reverse engineering and produce and market it locally within ASEAN. We're not doing that. For instance, farm equipment, heavy equipment, construction equipment, medical device, even pharmaceutical products, medicines and whatnot. We're not really doing that as ASEAN. And these are areas that, and the reason we're not doing that is because we're not really united. We're not really united. We are politically too diverse. I think it's just touch and go thing. So sometimes I wonder, it's quite curious, what's going to happen in the next weekend? What are they going to do? Is it a friendly discussion, or is it just everybody trying to rub shoulders and hoping for the best? But ASEAN is actually quite costly. Like this summit that we're having, some say that it's tens of billions or even hundreds of billions, and we do it twice this year, right? We won in second part of the year. So I think we have to really, it's got to come bottom up. We have to, I think I saw this PSM proposal. This is what you need to have. Bottom up proposal from the NGOs. Government has to listen to us, right? Because I don't think there's much gain that we are making. There's not much inroad we are achieving. So it's got to be a realignment how we go about. And of course, we talk about people-centered wages, jobs, and whatnot, right? The other part of untapped accommodation in the same report, they're saying that we should also not depend too much on advanced country economies market. We should also be looking at domestic demand. And domestic demand means addressing wages. And I think wage problem is in all the ASEAN countries except Singapore. All the ASEAN countries except Singapore. Maybe Brunei also is a problem. Singapore, Brunei. Brunei and Singapore, somehow Brunei is also very, very aligned with Singapore. So when we talk about like-minded countries, right? I doubt if Singapore is like-minded. I don't think they have same issues. I don't think they have same aspirations that we do. So what is ASEAN then to them? It's just an economic internet. They capitalize on the market. It's quite big business, and they lead as far as trade, investment concerned. Now they're going to digital economy, right? And now we're looking at Singapore having something like more than 1,000 family offices in Singapore, where they gather all the billionaires and whatnot, right, to manage the tax. So, and can you imagine that consolidation of capital in Singapore? I mean, they had that before because of the tax. Because Singapore being a bit of a tax haven, and so capital was converging to Singapore. They capitalizing it as far as investment in South Asian countries concerned. And now you have the digital economy, and so things are not really that great actually. We have to relook at it. And I stop there first. Let's have other views.
Yeah, so like we're here asking about like what does ASEAN mean to us, and also we have another question about what does ASEAN mean to Singapore also, right? So just following up for that question for Tian, Chua, what would it take for us to shift from extractive growth to shared prosperity across ASEAN?
I must say I'm going to present slightly long-winded, a bit different. When Dr. Kumar approached me, I was thinking of talking about ASEAN strategy, how to counter tariff, things like that. Last 2 days, I decided to change my mind because we all know the stage of heaven, what we want to achieve. But if we don't look back, why we are what we are, I totally agree with all the suggestions. If we are not looking why we are what we are, then we'll never get where we want to get. I prepared this slide, actually was originally for some young people to train them to think through history and the future action. I also assume that PSM will have a lot of young people that I can go through this, but now I look at it all expert, all so bear with me. Bear with me, I have to rehash some of the things. First, this title, actually there's a big question mark, but I didn't take it, but don't put it up because I want to be sound too silly. So next slide. Okay, I just want to quickly go through the history of ASEAN. Go to next. I want to bring this picture up. 1967, Bangkok. This is the historical picture. 5 foreign ministers from Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. These are people, Indonesia represented by Adam Malik. This Philippines by Ramos, the father of President Ramos later, Tun Razak, Rajaratnam of Singapore, and Hanu of Thailand. They all sit together in Bangkok to sign these historical declarations. A year before they signed a Bangkok Declaration, the next year they signed the declaration that gave birth to Associations of Southeast Asian Nations. I just want to take you to see another picture, which also happened in Southeast Asia, in Batu. These are the countries that come together, 29 countries that come together. Next. These are pictures that representing a very historical meeting, which bring together those countries that newly independent from Asia and Africa together and discuss issues like economic development, decolonization or post-colonization, and the issues of peace, where the geopolitical tensions was at the height. Next one. This is a picture that scared everybody in the West. If you see that, who are the people who attend? This is why Bandung's summit was frightened by those people who dominate the world. You see all these strong anti-colonial leaders, especially in the middle, you have John Lai there, which become something that's shaped the world. And that also gives rise to a very important movement for the next 2-3 decades, which is this formation of non-alignment. Today we are very much similar in these crossroads, where you have geopolitical tension, you have a lot of other things. I'll come back to Bandung in a while, but I want to say these two conferences integrally connect each other. It was 1955, where that's why I showed the last image that frightened everybody. And 12 years after that, we have another image which I showed Tun Razak and others with the formations of ASEAN. Why was ASEAN formed? Just now got very clear example. Next video. One of the main issues is security concern. The Vietnam War, Indochina is an image of what happened from Vietnam War started in 1955, the year Bandung Conference, and that also is a year that the French was defeated and replaced by the United States. And to counter this the spread of so-called communism, and together with the nationalism, we formed something before ASEAN. Next. Not yet. Okay, we formed something that's before ASEAN. I will come to that in a while. But the second reason for that, next, is the domestic challenges by all these Southeast Asian countries. Next. We have Indonesia, 1965, that's where Suharto staged a coup d'etat and seized Suharto. The military government declared Order Baru and also ended the confrontasi with Malaysia. We have next. Also the same year, Marcos, democratically elected, defeating the late Macapagal, again another president that, so later on we see Arroyo father. Next. In Thailand, the Communist Party of Thailand declared the starting of the revolution, overthrow the government, the monarchy, as well as the US-backed regime. Because as just now I mentioned, the Vietnam War, Thailand has the most military base in by the US, and the declaration by the Communist Party is that get rid of the US bases. And more scary for Thailand was there's a group of military people who call themselves the Patriotic Front. They also identified with the nationalist agenda, although they are not leftists, but they identify with the national agenda that want to get rid of the United States. So here, next one, very clearly in Malaya, we have the emergency, and similarly at that time declared in 1948 and continue until 1957, where supposedly we gained our independence. In Borneo, we have the start of the independent movement. Generally, Sabah, Sarawak, or what we call Northern Kalimantan, was inspired by Suharto's revolutions, and subsequently you have a precondition of formation of Malaysia, where Brunei must have a democratic election, where we see a leftist party came to power, and Brunei decided not to join, because if parliament is the only condition for them to join, they decided to stay under the colonial control. So this dynamic, this dynamic also lead to our ex-colonial power very concerned, because Asia is was the center of the world. Nobody has recognized this symbol, I think, most of you, right? Yeah, the next one. This is the precursor of ASEAN. It's called the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, modeled after NATO. If you see the country that joined in, it's very pelik dalam bahasa Melayu. You have France, you have Australia, you have New Zealand, you have all the others, exactly like what we have in Europe. This could have been our military treaty, and this could have been ASEAN that we know today. So you can see this is where the thing. It was dismantled after I think it was dismantled. Seattle was dismantled after probably about 10 years. This one. Yeah. Okay. Why I brought this up is that the regime at that time was in a very awkward situation. Internally, you have pressure from domestically. Externally, there is demand from the Western power that you have to stick to the security pact because otherwise you fall into the hands of the communists. But eventually, Seattle was dismantled. Firstly, due to a few things. First, internally in all this country, there is a rising of nationalistic feeling in Malaysia, in all other countries. Even though you have US install or pro-Western government, they feel concerned that if they continue like that, it couldn't sustain the domestic pressure. Secondly, globally, there's a rise of social democracy, where Australia, New Zealand, you have election of the left-wing Labour Party that decided that they don't want to be part of this military agreement, where they have to also, out of budget concern, they don't want to bear the cost of securities in Southeast Asia. They have looked to US. The US been dragged in and spent a lot of money just to fight the war in Korea, in Vietnam. So Australia, New Zealand, Canada all said, look, we don't want to get involved. So Seattle got dismantled. So Southeast Asia, we back to the 5% that we say, Ada Malay, Raza, and others, decided that what can we do? We can have a compromise. If you continue this, you will see increasing Western domination in our day-to-day life. We're going to see a lot of intervention in our securities and other things. And that even UMNO cannot stop. Right? Not to mention the others regime that also, Green Marcos and others, they also don't want day-to-day to be instructed. They just want, militarily, we can depend on US, but domestically, we want to get ourselves, our own organization. So that's why we see in the 70s, Vietnam War ended. ASEAN took a very pragmatic approach, starting to warm up with the Communist bloc. Our 60 years anniversary, our 50 years anniversary with China, we started to engage in a very pragmatic way. We become more friendly with Vietnam. In the 80s, we started to focus on economic development. From import substitution, gradually give way to export-oriented. That's not what we mentioned now. We begin to go into a more integrated into the global production. Then we also see that there is, in the 80s, inevitably, although ASEAN want to be totally non-intervention, but in the 80s we have no choice because we have to interfere or intervene in the Cambodian situation. After the fall of Pol Pot, we have Vietnam invasion. Finally, ASEAN has come in to make sure that there's a peaceful settlement. So it broke the original ASEAN non-intervention agreement. Then, of course, in the 90s, ASEAN decided to expand. Brunei was the first one that joined us after independence. We expand to include Vietnam and Vietnam in 95. Later on, Laos and Myanmar in 97. So Cambodia in 99. Lastly, hopefully, as Prime Minister promised, East Timor, Timor-Leste might join, become a former member in 2025. So we see that ASEAN also have moved away from total non-interference to the more pragmatic approach, limited interference, then to later on by saying that positive engagement in Myanmar, in Laos, and for other cases. So, okay, for us to move into the topic, now I will go into the topic. We look into this dynamic lens. By 80s, by 80s, the first, always you say Philippines was the first one independent. the first one with the people's power, and Marcos was overthrown by the people's power. This started a wave of gradual rise of people's movement in Southeast Asia, where previously we always think that these are things that are too far away from us. We will never get that because Asian people are feudal, Asian people want authoritarian rules, and Philippines broke the first taboo. And then we see next, following Philippines, we see Thailand and Indonesia. By 1988, Indonesia, the people's power spread to Indonesia, and we see Suharto's form. Then we also see in Thailand next. We also see in Thailand the liberal democratic forces was restored after the Chachai government until Thaksin was overthrown in 2006. You returned a military government. But generally, we see democratization, the liberal democratic ideas implanted by 2000 throughout Southeast Asia. So ASEAN, like it or not, as initiated by Malaysia, started to talk about Human Rights Council, engagement with civil society, and other things. But does it really make ASEAN, or is it possible with all this process to make ASEAN more people-centric? I take a slightly more cynical view. But the point is, the reason I prepared this slide is we have to prepare the next generations of the political activists to understand where ASEAN is coming from and how ASEAN potentially can be a zone of democracy, economy, growth. Previously, we always divide it up because we are so dominant by the ideas that authoritarianism bring economic growth. After economic growth, you get some form of liberalization. I try to advocate separately. For me, only through democratization we can achieve this next level of economic growth. The first level of economic growth, economic export-oriented economy, industrialization is over. I agree fully. The increase of salary, increase of livelihood, to allow us to become more self-sustained is the future. That's why we go back to the Bandung spirit, where how do we achieve that Bandung spirit? We can't depend on the current leaderships of ASEAN. We can't depend on this very expensive meeting that we held every year, the rotating chairman, or other things. But it is time for us to build the next wave of democratic movement, where I have slight differences with PSM, when PSM keep pushing for minimum wage increase. I think minimum wage increase has achieved its limitation, and any amount of pushing is not going to bring any positive impact to the growth of salary. And for me, the rising of living standard has to come from democratization by having a stronger bargaining power of the unions, of the democratic movement, not by government legislation, but it is creating new wave of people's movement. And why I see this potential, I want to be very clear. You look at our neighbor, Indonesia has 30 million people. Philippines has 100 million, 300 million people. Philippines has 100 million people. Thailand has 80 million people, and Vietnam, etc., etc. This region, we add together easily 500 million. When we talk about 500 million, for Malaysian, we have to remember it means that when you open your door, half of India or half of China is lying in front of your doorstep. Right? So I'm not worried about tariff. In fact, I welcome the tariff because our future market is dependent on this 500 million people. And with China, only about 15% of them become middle class. Today, China is a superpower. India, probably about 10 or 8% of them are middle class, but they are already a substantial consumer power, right? So, how do we get that? Do we just get the government to just keep giving benevolent policy? No, we have to start creating democratic movement that will push for a much more participating economy, much more democratic structure, where it will raise our living standard. Eventually, we will be based on this consumer base for our industry, our economic consumption goods, instead of continuously depending on US, on the Western world. So that's for me is a future for people-centric development. Whether it's going to be called ASEAN or whether ASEAN is going to maintain its relevance, I'm not sure. But I think the revive of a people's-oriented movement that mirror the Bandung spirit, where you have visionary leaders that aspire for independent, self-sustained, and to take pride for being a decolonized, post-colonial society. That is quite, that is the project that we have to engage in towards a more people-centric ASEAN movement. Thank you very much.
Hello. Okay. So thanks so much, Tian Chua, for laying out that important historical context from Seattle to ASEAN and how the region has evolved politically. There's a lot to unpack, and I very much agree with Tian Chua's point that we have to stop relying on basically Western market, right? We need to have something like intra-trade ASEAN. We need to boost that. But that's for another session. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Kumar to share his thoughts. Maybe you could pick up from where Azlan and Tian left off, looking at the bigger economic and political shifts happening across the region and bring it home a bit. What's the picture like here in Malaysia?
Thanks, Aiman. Thank you all for attending. Okay, the next slide. Okay, actually, our region has had two different models of development presented to us. I mean, that's the Bandung conference that we talked about. And basically, the idea there is we, as independent countries, to stand on our own feet, have our own technology, build our own industry, and be more independent of the West. I mean, that's that model. But on the other side, you have what Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, and they're saying the best way forward is to use the technology to open up, have trade, have investment from the West. It's a different ideology. Okay, so these are the two contesting ideologies for this area. And the initial Bandung one was very strong. A lot of people were for that. But the thing is, we didn't have capital, we didn't have technology, we didn't have enough trained people, and we more or less moved towards this model of export-led growth. Like in Malaysia, it's like in the 70s, all the free trade growth, brought in investment, and there was growth. The next one, please. Next slide. You see, in Malaysia, though can I have the next slide, please? So basically, we now in Malaysia, in fact, the whole of ASEAN, we have FDI-dependent, export-oriented economies. And the FDI is not really much for capital, it's more for technology and for the markets. Without the global change, you can't actually sell your products. was actually control of the Western markets through the global chains. And so basically it's low cost and low tariffs. Now, for example, the tariffs in Southeast Asia is like zero for about 97, 98% of the goods we produce. It's very low tariffs, but high IPR requirements. You pay a lot of royalties to the major companies. And we have multiple free trade agreements. And basically that results in the loss of economic sovereignty. That means because of all the agreements that you have, you can't do very much. For example, the CPTPP actually says that you cannot ask investing companies to do any, for example, to take so many percent of local, inputs, or to do technology transfer, or to train people. You can't ask those things. So give it free to them. So it's a lot of rights to the investor, and not much power for local governments to control them. So basically, the philosophy is the market goes best. The best thing a government can do is to go and nationalize. You have to stay in the background. Not to come and the governments come and distort the efficiencies and all that. So you just stay in the background, let the market look after itself. Okay, this is the kind of philosophy behind our system. Okay, next slide, please. Actually, Malaysia has done fairly well. If you look at the last 50 years, our GDP in real terms, which means that if you take away the effect of inflation, our GDP has grown 24 times, in the 50 years. So we haven't done badly, And if you look at the other things, I think people are living better. I think we got to accept. Though I'm critical of certain things, I want changes, we got to look at the whole perspective. I think Malaysia, looking at the life in this sense, neonatal mortality, for example, that's 31 deaths per 100,000 live births in 51, and now it's gone to okay. No, 31. It was 31. 31 deaths per 1,000 live births in 1951. It's come down to 4.4. Because of so many live births, only 4.4 of them died. Neonatal mortality is death in the first 28 days of life. Maternal mortality also has come down tenfold. This is per 100,000 live births. And life expectancy was 57 in 1960. It's gone up to about 75 now. So you can say, you cannot say nothing has happened. Things have happened and people are living much better. Even the working people, they have motorbikes, they have televisions, they have washing machines, So you cannot say that conditions haven't changed. This model of development did give some benefits to the people, all right? But next one, you have a look and see. Next slide, please. But you see, UNICEF did a survey, and 21% of Malaysian children below the age of 5 are stunted. Stunted means your height is less than the third percentile for that age group. It actually means there's long-term malnutrition. If it's acute malnutrition, let's say you're okay, well-fed, and suddenly you're lack of food, you'll be thin, you'll be underweight, you won't be stunted. Stunted is skeletal. It's long-term. That means in this country where you have GDP growing so much, about 1/5 of the families are not feeding their children adequately. That's what it means. That's what the statistics mean. Our senior citizens, now in some way there's a curse because you have to rely on your children for your sustenance. About 70%, because only a few people get pension, and EPF doesn't last. For most people, EPF rise up in the first 5 years. So when you're really older and you cannot work, you're dependent on your children, and especially for the B40, your children also actually have low incomes. They're struggling with cost of living, their children's So it's a real big problem of old age poverty that we're facing. And our household debt is about 2 times household income, annual household income. So it's quite big. That is quite big. Debt servicing for families is about 50 to 20% of income. So there is a lot of economic hardship. Because of this household debt, people have got to work more than 8 hours usually. They do overtime, they do a second job, they try to do some business on the side. So a lot of our working people are quite harassed, meeting the bills, dealing with their debts and all that. Next one, please. Okay, our national debt now is about 60%, or a bit more than 60% of our GDP. It's 1.2 trillion, and our debt servicing is 56 billion per year. Our health budget for this year is only 47 billion. Our debt servicing is more than that. We have our food self-sufficiency is terrible now. We're only producing about half the rice that we consume. And of course, none of the wheat that we consume is produced locally. So actually we are very, very dependent on imports. We look at food security. I think we've got to look at caloric security first. Can't look at vegetables and fruits. Of course, today we've got a lot of exporting, but that's not the issue. The issue is to stay alive, we need calories, we need green grains, and we're quite bad. We're dependent, and we like this, and you protect so much of your basic foods, then any change in the global supply system, makes you very, very vulnerable to important inflation. There'll be problems. And this side is, I just went to Sertam cardiology unit, and this is how it looks. It's just so crowded. So when I saw the doctor, he told me, we've got 600 outpatients today, and that's the normal. So I'm very sympathetic to government doctors. They're working hell of a hard, under difficult circumstances. Can you imagine he said we've got 600, and today we've got 60 angiograms and interventions. They're doing both things the same day. So I'll probably go back about 11 to 9. It is unfair, It's unfair to expect them to work like that. And it is because of chronic underfunding of the public healthcare system. This doesn't occur overnight. It's over time, we have chronically, so that means we have grown our GDP 24-fold. We have done quite well. But an essential thing like public healthcare has been grossly underfunded for the last 30, 40 years. It's really falling apart. And in fact, if any government doctor resigns because he cannot take the stress, I wouldn't blame them. I think I'll blame us while we're doing more to protect them, to get more funds for them. We expect them to work like that, sacrifice. The tension is terrible. Not only the doctors, like the nurses, all the staff there, that number of people there, it's ridiculous. So one of the problems, I think, we're getting the wealth, but are we using it properly? And why we are not using it properly? Down here is our highways. I think we are the country with, the largest number of cars per population compared to many other countries. We have spent so little money on public transport. So what I'm trying to point out is we have growth, but we don't have proper distribution. And the people at the bottom are not getting, in terms of income, in terms of healthcare, in terms of transport, in terms of old age pension. Next one, please. This, we took a look at the distribution of national income. So about 97% of the working population gets 25% of the total income for the country. The government gets about 16% of the total income of the country. About 59% goes to the largest corporations and to about 3% of the working people. So this is the distribution of wealth in Malaysia at present. Okay, a large chunk of it is going to the corporate classes and the richest, like the CEOs, the managers, of the big companies. The next one, please. So actually, what PSM has been saying is, same with what Tian and Azlan said, we've got to develop the local market. That we need to have more jobs in ASEAN, and to develop the local market means one is wages, and the other is government income. Government gets more income, government spends more on healthcare, the market also increases. So we need more of the wealth to be within ASEAN instead of going out to the corporations. So we need wages, and then when we say protect, see, basically if we increase the local market, but you have cheap Chinese goods coming in, taking over, there's no point either, So I think Trump has got a certain point there, You cannot just increase market, then you allow cheap production from elsewhere coming and submerging your firms. So I think we got to take a look at the whole economy. What is the economy for? To me, the economy should produce the goods and services the population needs, number one. Number two, it should produce the jobs so people can get income to buy those goods and services that's being produced. So these two must be protected in the economy. And you just cannot say you want to have free trade and very low tariffs if it undermines those two things. It undermines the production of goods and services for your people. It undermines the capacity to get the money to buy those goods and services. Then what's the point? It's going against the basic purpose of the economy. So I think I think in a way that Trump has done us a service by disrupting the whole thing. Because before this, World Bank and IMF have been saying, like free trade, zero tariff, it's like the golden standard. You all must follow. That's the way forward. But by now, US saying, bucking the trend, it actually opens that ground for us to discuss what's the economy for. So I think we can. So basically, you got to do that. The second thing that ASEAN should do is talk about food self-sufficiency. Like in Malaysia, our total area that we use for agriculture is 8.4 billion hectares. Okay, that's about 1/4 of the total land area of Malaysia, 8.4 billion hectares. Of that, about almost 6 billion hectares is oil palm. Another 1 million hectares is rubber. So the amount was actually spent for paddy is only about 600,000 hectares, 0.6 million hectares. So actually we're spending so little of our agricultural land is actually for producing food for our people. Much of it is actually for export market. It's for commercial production. And like I told you earlier, our cereal production is pretty bad. So you got to talk about things like technological and industrial self-sufficiency. I think someone mentioned about pharmacological. Why can't ASEAN, with a 690 million population, have a pharmaceutical industry that produces most of our drugs? Why do we have to import from these guys and pay such a high amount? I had a patient who was on this special drug called baricitinib for rheumatoid arthritis, and it costs about 2,500 per month, to take that drug. But that person went to India and sourced the drug there. It only costs about $200 a month. So the drug is actually quite cheap to make. This guy's got patents, and they use that, and then they really, Azlan, really take so much money. So if we can have our own, pharmaceutical thing, maybe you can talk about, we don't have, some of these things you don't have, economies of scale for one country. But if you work with other ASEAN countries, 500 million people, more than that, we can do this. And countries like Cuba, for example, got a good pharmaceutical, we can do a kind of a joint venture with them, for example, and develop this. This is the kind of things that ASEAN has got to think about. How can we grow our wealth? See, the problem, talking about the problem that we are facing in ASEAN, in Malaysia, is that though we're having growth, our growth is predicated on low wages. That's the root of the problem. We're getting all these guys coming to invest here because of low wages. And if we increase our wages, then people will probably go to Vietnam or Thailand where it gets low wages. So the low wage is a pain to us. It gets the investments, gets the economic growth, but the wealth doesn't go to the workers because you must have low wages. Because your whole model of development is based on the low wages. And our hands are tied. If Malaysia alone increases wages, then we have loss not only of FDI now, we also have a loss of our local business people. They want to expand. Why you want to expand Malaysia where the wages are so high? You expand in Thailand, you expand in Vietnam. Because after all, in Southeast Asia, tariffs are zero. You can produce your shoes or your shirts or whatever there and sell back here. You don't have to produce it here because there are no tariffs. So if you're into this situation where we are tied, you see, that's why you need to increase wages. The other thing is, government can also help distribute the wealth, right? Government can tax and use the taxes to pay for healthcare, for example, or subsidize housing or subsidize transport, all these things. But our government, our tax rate for corporates has come down from about 40% in the 80s to about 24% now. Because we, with Thailand and Vietnam, we're playing this game of getting FDI. So we were at first 40%. Then this IMF fellows and World Bank told us, hey, let's reduce a bit, then we get FDI. So we reduced, then Thailand reduced, and Vietnam reduced. So there's a competition. So right now, Thailand is about 20% of its corporate tax rate. We are 24%. Singapore is 17%. So we're playing this race to the bottom. So this is the kind of things that ASEAN has got to look at and see, how can we as ASEAN stop this crazy game of a race to the bottom, in corporate taxes. If we can all increase our taxes, then we can increase healthcare, we can increase, free education, we can do a lot of other things, but right now we cannot because we've already got such a big deficit. We can't keep on borrowing to do those things. Similarly, can ASEAN as a group together increase wages in tandem? Because if Malaysia increases by ourselves, there's a danger we lose investment, then lose jobs. But let's say, and we know we have got different levels, Never mind, wherever you are, you go up 10%, I also go up 10%, you also go up 10%, we all go up 10%. So then we don't lose our comparative advantage, but we increase the buying power in our people. We increase the market for our small traders. It's a kind of a win-win, is it? These are the kind of things that ASEAN has got to talk. Rely more on the domestic market, work together to increase wages, work together to increase the tax rate, maybe back to 30% of corporate profits. Then we could do it by, Malaysia is 24%. Over 10 years, we go up 0.6% every year. Thailand is 20%, so you go up 1% every year. So at the end of 10 years, we're all at 30%. And we can use that money for our people, for the environment, for energy conversion. Wealth is being produced, but where is the wealth going? The wealth's not coming where it should be going. So you've got to look into these things. So we can regain control of economic policy if we can come together. So the problem is now, it's so integrated with ASEAN, it's difficult for any one country to do this on its own. Maybe Indonesia can, they're big enough. But for other countries like us, if we unilaterally increase our taxes, if we increase our wage rates, then we may lose investment, we may lose jobs. Okay, next one. Look who that is. That's the other guy. This guy you all know, that one. That is, you know, Samir Amin. That's Samir Amin. He's an Egyptian Marxist. He's already passed away. But he's been talking for a long time of what he calls delinking. He's saying that basically this relationship with he calls them the triad, the central countries, US, Europe, and Japan, he calls them the triad. They're basically sucking out wealth from the third world. And the only way you can move forward is to delink from them. and have a more independent, have the Bandung kind of idea, develop your own capacity, your own technology, your own business, your own industry, and build from there. And that's what he had to the whole existing system. In a way, is good because the existing system wasn't in our favor. The rules-based order was still transferring wealth at a tremendous rate to the richest people in the world. You look at Oxford, every time they come out and say the richest 4 fellas own more wealth than the bottom 50%, those kind of figures. That's what's been happening. That's the rules-based order that we had. So that Trump disrupting that isn't necessarily a bad thing because it wasn't such a good thing for us. So now it gives us a chance to question those kinds of things. What kind of order do we want? How can the wealth that has been created in countries like Malaysia be used for ourselves? Next one, please. You see, the problem we face is that guy there represents our political leadership and the leaders of our planning institutions. People in our EPU, people in our planners have had their minds washed by World Bank, IMF, and they talk the same language. They go for things like free trade agreements. They think trade it should be at the top of everything. Tariff should be very low. They believe in free movement of capital. They really believe that because for them, the market should be free. The market is the best distributor of assets. Believe the market will only have prosperity for everyone. So that's the kind of thinking they're coming from. So I think someone said, no point talking to these guys here. They already probably won't follow. So we need to have people's movements in all our societies, all over ASEAN. People's movements are come forward and put forward the Bandung kind of a spirit for the 21st century. That's what we need to do. We need to kind of get more people to understand what we're talking about, to understand that the very nature of our model of development has the very nature of our model of development is the one that grows the GDP, but at the same time keeps the ordinary people who create that wealth, poor. It's structurally, integrally part of that. We want to change that. Okay, I'll stop here. Thanks. So given up already. We should go back.
So, can everyone, while we're waiting for the technical problem, can everyone hear me? Is it clear? Okay. So right now we're just gonna open the floor to questions. So, does anyone have any questions?
Hello.
So we can take several questions, maybe 3 questions. All right. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello? Sorry. Okay. So I can start. Okay. So I'm Irfan from PSM. I have a short question to Dr. Kumala actually. Because earlier you mentioned about self-sufficiency in terms of our food and so that we don't like produce wheat of our own, but I was wondering, is it probably more because of the fact that our land is not suitable for wheat planting, for example? So how can we be self-sufficient in wheat, for example?
Sorry, hi, I'm Hema, part of PSM as well, member. My question is, I think there's more than just corporate tax. I think it's also ending transfer pricing. And also, with regards to corporate tax, most people, even though their corporate tax would go up, they might not actually pay the full tax. So I think it's looking at it beyond just the pure percentage. It's actually whether they're actually paying and avoiding money going out of the country or the region. So that's like, what are your thoughts on that?
Hello? Okay. I have a question for any one of the speakers. When I think about the people-centric ASEAN, a number of factors comes into mind. And one of the biggest factor is the temptation to compare this Southeast Asian bloc with Europe. When we make that comparison, we are able to see the European bloc, they have come a long way in a very short period of time. For 70 over years, for decades, they have been at each other's throat, but they are able to coalesce. And we have the European Parliament, we have the economic bloc, we have laws that are uniform, and compliance are more conformity rather than violation. They even have human rights bodies, enforcement, things like that. But when we look at ASEAN, we see diverse culture. It's difficult not to think about the problems that could arise. For example, when I look at the billboard, it says that we are chairman of ASEAN this year, Malaysia's chairman. But this is only sort of like, for one of a better word, part of growing up, because we still haven't reached that stage where we sit down in a more formal, more holistic way around the table to discuss. We don't have an ASEAN parliament where we can meet periodically and get all the different components to come together, like what is happening in Europe, where there's serious discussion and policies are being made and they are very implemented. Now, one ASEAN chairmanship is just no more than advertisement. And I'm afraid when the event is over, then nothing happens. What say you, anyone? I have other issues I want to, but I just answer specifically on that. First of all, I think nobody is comparing it with Europe. Secondly, Europe is not a model for us. Thirdly, Europe is not a good model for us, right? Europe is what it is because, as I said earlier, it's NATO. NATO is the core of it, right? Then you have, after that, you add a bit of democratic feature, you have about trade feature. If we want to do that, we have to keep Seattle, which we don't want. So I think Europe is not a model.
We never imagined, today we see a lot of problem in Europe, and we also don't want to sacrifice our independence and our what's it called, our autonomy to be decided by either bureaucrats in Singapore or in Jakarta. I don't think that's what we hope to do that. So there's no comparison. What we are talking about is how do we as a region share prosperity? Yeah. And EU was not designed for that. EU is designed as a security package because they constantly imagine Russians going to attack them. So that's why they keep the unity. And that's why they constantly stand with America, because they need that. We don't have a big brother here. So in a way, I'm quite happy that every year we have this rotation, discussion, and all these things. I mean, it's okay. To me, it's we have to move our own pace in terms of economic integration. I will leave it to more discussion later. But I just want to put aside one thing. Let's not dream or even think it's desirable that we have a centralized regulatory body for ASEAN. I mean, it's impossible and it's not desirable, right? What we really need is the current ASEAN serve its function as a body that regulate, what's it called, sharing ideas and trying to come with some consensus on some basic thing. But what we are talking beyond that, which is, my view is, when you talk about people-centric, you talk about industrialization, we talk about, I don't expect ASEAN as a body to take those tasks out. Each of the national government must really do it. We cannot just depend, if we just hand over to say, okay, we have a centralized body called ASEAN and then they do it all this for us. I think that's not going to work, right? We need to, I said, we need to understand the history, where we come from. And what we move on is like each of us as a nation have to work out how do we improve our economy, how to increase prosperity, and how do we share this with our neighbors? That's a more desirable stage that I would think so. Yeah, that we want to move towards.
Okay, Irfan, you talked about self-sufficiency in food. I think you're perfectly right. I mean, like wheat is something we'll have to import, you know. And actually, if you look at the figures, I think it's something like 2.7 million tons of rice per year and 1.7 million tons of wheat flour, you know. So quite a lot of wheat goes into our chapati, our bread, buns and all that. So we're quite dependent on that. But you see, even rice which we can produce, we're only producing 52%. Itu satu kelemahan. That's one something we can do something about. So I think when we talk about food security, we need to look at caloric security. We've got to say, okay, we're importing so much meat right now, it's affordable. But what if there is a disruption for whatever reason in wheat supply, the price goes up? What can we do? And one thing we can do is, if we have enough rice can take over a bit of that. The other thing is there are so much tubers in this country, you know, ubi keledek and ubi kantang and all the different kinds of tubers and potatoes have the same function as rice in terms of. So we should think of what can we develop in terms of, so but have it as a standby. I think in World War II time, a lot of people were on tapioca, you know, isn't it? So I think it is something that we got to think of as a strategy, and we also got to think, is there a need for us to take some of the land from the plantations, from oil palm cultivation, to produce rice, to produce tubers, at least have that capacity, you know? Actually, our PSM suggestion is the government should ask large plantations, those with more than 1,000 acres, don't go and cut down the smallholders. Those with more than 1,000 acres must put 5% of their land for producing caloric foods. whether it's rice or tubers. So we can improve well, right now I think we're very insecure. We can improve it, but definitely, we cannot produce wheat here. Doesn't grow here. I talked about transfer pricing. I think that's a good point. Transfer pricing is when a company takes out its profits, which MNC sends its profits back to the country by playing with the pricing mechanism. Let's say you buy some components from outside, from that company to Malaysia. You overprice the components you're buying. You overprice the services, the royalties, and then you underprice what you're selling. So the profit in Malaysia is low because your expenditure in terms of buying all this stuff is high, and you're selling it to your mother company or the subsidiary of the mother company outside at a low price. So your profit is low, so only pay taxes on that, right? Yeah, so I agree with that. That's going on. We factor all that in. I'm not sure how you factor that in an objective way. That means what the working people are getting now, I said, is 25%. It could be actually less than 25%. That of all the wealth created in this country, I said 25%. But if you take in things like that, it maybe is 20% or even lower. Which actually you think of it as a scam. If 97% of the working people in the country get only 20% of the wealth created by their labor, then something is wrong, Also, you talked about EU. Yeah, I think Europe is in a pretty bad shape, You see, how to say, the victory of the West over Russia in the Cold War, in a way, is boomerang back on the victors. Because what has happened is, the peripheries, China and all that, which were formerly communist and they were closed economies, have now become low-cost production centers. And so, factories, which used to pay good wages in America and Britain, because they had unions and all that, they were paid very well. So what they did was they just packed up and went over there. So they got this whole Rust Belt in the US, right? So all those former working class communities are now voting Trump, you see, because they've really been, disadvantaged. They've lost their jobs, they lost their security, they lost their unions, and because the Western countries had very powerful welfare states, but there was their deal with the working class. But because the taxes came down, they've been trying to cut back on the welfare. Like in France, they tried to make the pension age from 65 to 67. And then they had the yellow shirts fighting and all that. In UK, from free tertiary education, it's come like Malaysia, PTPTN, it's loans. Healthcare is being underfunded in all these countries. So Europe had a pretty good kind of a model at one point. But now, because of the outsourcing of companies, of factories to the third world, they're actually facing a lot of problems. I mean, their debt is so high now, the government debt is very high. So it's not a good place to be. And that's why so many people in Europe are angry with the system. And they don't trust the traditional politicians, whether center-right or center-left. They've both been interchangeably cutting back on the welfare state. They've been interchangeably doing all these things, allowing the migration of capital and industry outside. So it's a rejection of the center. And that's why we have all this, ethnocentric, populist kind of, so they are a very unhappy place right now.
Okay. Oh.
Let me touch a bit on the issue of transfer pricing. Now, transfer pricing would be a necessary strategy if in particular FDIs, foreign direct investors, when they are being taxed. Most FDIs in Malaysia, they get tax holidays. They get these exemptions and whatnot. I would want to share with you one real world case example. There is this company, they're doing, an American company, doing $1 billion ringgit a year. They basically producing things using our limestone. When I met them, because we were pursuing a renewable energy solution for me. When I met them, they had not paid tax for the last 18 years of the operations in Malaysia. 18 years, never paid tax, right? They guzzle our cheap energy, our electricity and gas subsidized because they have to deal with limestone. There is all high energy consumption. They've got big pollution, waste and whatnot. And they've got only about 400 people working with them, mostly low wage. So that's not a typical FBI, but that's quite common, right? So they never pay tax, and they really extract from us energy and and don't pay tax. Can you imagine that? Now they are of course. Now I would want to relate that to ASEAN. Now ASEAN corporates and certain dominant countries are accessing the markets of ASEAN, accessing to the resources of ASEAN, right? But they don't pay tax, you see? Within a country, you have companies, corporates, and they're extracting, exploiting whatever, but they have to pay tax. But in the case of ASEAN, right, there is this, it's a free for all, So whoever is financially, capital-wise dominant, they just have it easy, So I think these are things like, and for instance, the trade that we do, when we brag about our trade, exports being 1.4 trillion, 1.5 trillion, that's our export. It's very high, almost our GDP. Now, but 40% of that is electrical electronics, right? So we export something like 40% of 1.4. You're talking about something like 500 billion, right? But the import on E&E is almost the same. It's only about 5% less, So that brings up the issue about what is actually the trade that we're doing, and being part of the so-called global value chain, being part of the global value chain. What does it mean? I mean, in the olden days, right? You trade when you have what they call comparative advantage. You can grow rice, you can grow wheat, so you export the surplus. So you get foreign exchange, and you use that to buy things that you don't have. And in fact, in some countries like Japan, they are very calculative about this, right? They do not really want investment. They don't really want. So they only export. Well, I'm talking about previous management style, not the current one, right? So, but we are so obsessed with trade because that's supposed to increase our GDP and whatnot, right? But what does it really bring us? That's why when UNCTAD in their TDR 2013 says that the export-led growth does not work anymore, right? Now that all our leaders of ASEAN and Malaysia, right? They should be. Wait a minute. Why are you saying this textbook stuff? I mean, why are you saying that export-led is no good anymore? It's go against all the mainstream economic thinking. But we did not do that. We did not reassess this situation and evaluate, take a pit stop and then and do things differently. We didn't. We're still obsessed with increasing our trade. That's why the FTAs, we have so many FTAs now. We've just finished the European FTA, which is the Norway and Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and we're going to be negotiating with EU soon. and they're planning to finalize it by end of this year, right? We want more trade. And why is that? It's just a GDP obsessed, GDP fetish approach. Because I think if we want to go, I think this is the thing that if you want to address more people-centric approach to ASEAN, I think we have to, I mean, there's got to be a revolution first. You just got to change. Because the present leaders don't think that way, right? Your slide on the brainwashing, right? I mean, what Paul Krugman called it as zombie ideas, right? Trickle down economics. It doesn't work anymore. Everybody knows that, but they're still pursuing it. We are pursuing it. That's why, we indirectly, we are quite supply side. So we are more focused on it. You see, well, as part of Malay Chambers, right? I also attend Pemuda, which is a special task force for addressing bureaucracies. It's all business. And the Iltizam, Akta Iltizam, that I think was approved, I think 3 months back, right? Oh, sorry, it's not tabled yet. Akta Iltizam. Akta Iltizam was basically New Deal for business. It was called New Deal for business. It was detailed out by Malaysian Productivity Center, but for political acceptance, it is rebranded as Iltizam, Akta Iltizam. It's coming soon, right? Now it's basically it's of business lah. It's of business. We are currently pursuing the World Bank ready for business, be ready. Again, prescription for how to structure your economy so that become more free market structured in a free market system. It's less and less people centric. It's less and less people centric. So I think this is a thing that we have to really relook. Almost everything that we're doing we're doing it wrong, right? We're doing it wrong. So, but how to change that? That's the thing. How do we change that? How to address this?
Thank you. So I actually want to touch more on the food sovereignty. So the Malaysian dependency, we're still depending on food imports, right? So mostly our rice, let's say our rice is coming, 60% of our rice are coming from imports. Countries like Thailand, Cambodia, 45%. So it's pretty low actually. But the question is, why is it happening? Is it the lack of the infrastructure, or is it climate change, or is it a lack of funding by our government, or is that nobody wants to grow paddy anymore, or is it all of them combined? So my question is, what strategies that we need to adopt to increase our local production, to increase our food security in this country, and also to reduce vulnerability from this global shock that might happen to us. And also there's some study about leveraging AI to it is seen as a potential method to revolutionize the agriculture in ASEAN. And if you all know, there are some companies in Malaysia who's already leveraging this existing technology. For example, there's a company called Plantix that develops a mobile application that assists Malaysian farmers in diagnosing plant diseases and basically to grow better crops. So is it my next question is it the time for us to adapt to this technology, or what are your thoughts on this? Maybe we can take several more questions.
You mentioned earlier that from 1970 to 2020, Malaysia's GDP has grown 24 times. But where we are today, the quality of life, especially for the P40, and you rightly touched on the health sector. This is my personal experience. I haven't been to GH Kuala Lumpur for many years, but I happened to go there 1 month ago because my sister was taken to A&E, and I was shocked. It looked like a third world. So my question is, why isn't, like, even if we increase incomes or the government coffers increase, is there any assurance that the government is going to put all this money in the right places? Like, as far as I know, the health budget is only about 2.3%. No, that's to me, I think health and education are the two important ministries to enhance the workers, and also, if you have a healthy workforce, you'll have a better country, you'll have a better production and in all aspects. So I just want to find out from you how best PSM wants to spearhead this, and I'd like to hear your comments.
Thank you. This has been so insightful. Thank you so much for all your contributions. So I have two observations, and I'd like your point of views on this. So number one is our addiction to debt. And this is arguably the largest transfer of wealth, that we are enriching ourselves at the cost of future generations. And we still haven't evolved the concept of rights of children, future generation. And in an aging society, I think this is a dangerous premise. And the second thing, of course, is the climate crisis. As adverse the frequency intensity is going to increase, is this going to be a great leveler and bring a lot of these weaknesses to the fore? Your thoughts on this, please. Thank you.
There's one more question.
I kind of don't want to add more complexity to this because you guys are being loaded with questions and narratives and essays. So I'm sorry because I just want to get this question out. Isn't being people-centric more profitable in the long run anyways? So why are all these, billionaires and millionaires and all these rich companies or whatever not more people-centric? Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
On the people-centric, it has, I think for Malaysia in particular, right? If our wages are very low, in my opinion, right? We should raise our wage, right, to the level that household income, 90% of our households exceeds the living wage. The living wage has been addressed by EPF, by Bank Negara. For a family of four, is in the region of about 6,500 years ago. But anyway, EPF still says about 6,000 plus. But let's say in 10 years' time, it will be something like 10,000. Now, if we raise wages through various mechanisms, not only just minimum wage, but through better collective bargaining, unions and whatnot, right? Through addressing foreign workers, better social protection and whatnot, wages. Because kita punya what's called the autonomous spending, right, is very low, and kalau kita raise kita punya income, right? If you go by the marginal propensity to consume punya calculation, the multiplier is almost 10 times. Almost 10 times. Right? Maybe more, It depends on the NPC tu. So maknanya kalau if you raise wages, you raise the overall society punya purchasing power, right? the economy will grow like crazy, Tapi up to what time can we, at what level can we rely on this consumption? Definitely up to when 90% of households reach the living wage. Money kita have a lot of room to focus on wage improvement. Maybe another 10 years, I think. And kita ni, kalau based on Richard Koo kan punya his book on what they call it, pursuit economy. Richard Koo, Nomura economist. We Malaysia, we miss what they call the Lewis turning point. Biasanya in an economy, right, the rural workers, the agricultural workers will migrate to the urban areas because of process of industrialization, kan? Manufacturing dekat cities and whatnot. So there's a movement. Up to a point, dah saturated dah, tak ada lagi dah. There's no more agricultural workers, no more rural workers. And that point is called the Lewis turning point. It goes up. And Richard Koo kata that shoot up kan is the golden era. Why the golden era? Because workers gain and industry also gain. Maknanya they have better purchasing power, and then the workers also have pay, and then we will have less stunted children. We are really growing the people. Maknanya you're right. People-centric will improve the economy, and especially Malaysia, we can just do that without even our export. No, never that. Our economy will grow many times just based on the consumption. Tapi we already have resources to export. So we should export, but we should not be going to the level of suppressing wages. We should not. And then we have laws, kan, macam di apa tu, I do not know what your SM position on the multiplicity of union and whatnot. We are suppressing unions. So kalau kita, if we have better unions, then you don't have to so much have to address the minimum wage. You know, in the Nordic countries, they tak ada minimum wage. Everything is negotiated through collective bargaining. You know, so everything is union. Then you're giving more negotiating power, market power to the workers. Jadi kalau through that, I mean that's what Europe in the good way. That's what Europe is. They've got good they're not macam kita ni, we are under consuming. We are suffering under consumption, and kita punya industry is what do you call it, under producing. We have a lot of spare capacities lah. So I think you're right. I think we should, but masalah dia our economic management.
Okay, your question about rice production. See, our rice production is very controlled in Malaysia. You know, we have, no one can import rice except for Pernas. Pernas is the only company that can import rice, but Pernas is supposed to buy all the local rice. So actually for Pernas, it's better if it can import rice because it's cheaper, and then they can sell that rice more expensive. Local rice has got a certain fix. You know, it's controlled at 260 per kg. You know, so Pernas is actually one of the problems, because it's to Pernas's benefit if Malaysia doesn't produce as much rice. You know, see, the government controls the price of rice. You know, for a reason, because if rice price goes up, it's a staple food. The urban working people are affected. You know, but then how about the people who produce the rice? You've got about 200,000 farmers for sawah padi. You know, so you are controlling the price of rice to support the whole population, but these people are living in poverty. You know, so that's, you got to see as a society you want them to produce rice. In fact, when the British were around, they forbade the rice producers to change to rubber. You know, they wanted them to carry on. They didn't give permission to change because they knew they wanted the rice. There was a law in the 1930s. So basically, you want them to produce rice, but they don't. So the government actually spends money now, almost about 2.5 billion a year to subsidize rice production, and they do it through giving free fertilizer, you know, So when this in Malaysia, under Tun Razak's time, it was done by government agencies. The scheme worked fairly well. Now it's become, a lot of this help for poorer Malays has been privatized to contractors, who sometimes, now they go and talk to petty farmers, they really bitterly complain about the quality of the fertilizer, the timing of the fertilizer. They say it's no use, got to throw it away, you know. So there is a whole system of helping petty farmers, but which is not, right now, it's big, 2.5 billion is big money. But is it really going to the petty farmers, you know? Or is it the contractors who are doing this, are they making the money out of it? You've got to look into all these things. But I think in principle, if you want to control the price of paddy and rice so that the urban population gets it, you must do something to subsidize the paddy farmers. So the paddy farmers are asking, they have got a group called Paddy Rescue. They are asking that they be given vouchers instead. Instead of giving us fertilizer, give us vouchers, we go buy, we know where we can buy. They are asking for a pension. After we become 60 years old, give us a pension, because we were not able to save money because of our low income. So give us a pension. So they're asking for certain things, which I think is quite fair, you see. And the other thing is, you find that the irrigation is a problem. In some places, like the Pemuda scheme and all that, it's not been upkept properly. You know, not enough money has been spent for irrigation. Paddy irrigation is very important. So we have a different, I think in the Pemuda scheme, it's like 3 tons. But in Sekinchang, it's about 3 times higher, you know, 3-4 times higher. Sekinchang production of paddy, so much higher. So there are all these issues you've got to look into, you know. Okay, that's paddy. About hospitals, whether if the government is given money, whether they'll put the money in the right place. I'm not sure, you know, because the problem with Malaysia is government also is the biggest owner of the private hospital chains, you know, the Pantai, Saim Dabi, and then the Johor chain, you know, the KPJ. So the biggest chains are actually also owned by government. And the problem is government sees health as a commodity that can be traded. Health tourism, like Penang, and you bring in a lot of foreigners and you make money. They see it as a legitimate kind of a job that you can trade with. It's just like any other commodity, like rubber or tin, you can trade with it to make money. But when you do that, you actually don't have enough specialists in the government side, you know, because many of them go to the private side. So you've got to have a huge change. One is you've got to put more money into the health ministry. We are asking for 5% in stages. Over the next 5 years, bring it to 5%. You know, we are also asking that there should be a moratorium on new private hospitals. Because each time a private hospital opens, they don't come with their own specialists, you know. They come and they steal the specialists from the government, right? They open a hospital, then they go around to the nearby government hospitals and they talk to people. And they give very good deals, you know. They say, look, you're a good surgeon. They say, come, open up. And we will guarantee you a monthly income of 40,000. If you don't collect from your patients that amount, we'll top you up to 40,000 per month. So very good deals, and they pull. Not only doctors, nurses, you know, X-ray technicians, ultrasonists, you know. So they basically, the growth of private hospitals actually weakens the government sector. So in fact, the PSM is just starting a campaign this year that you want a moratorium for 10 years. No more new private hospitals. We're not nasty. You won't say close down the private existing one. They do your function. Leave them alone. But the new ones don't have new ones. But these are all these things that we got to have a people's movement that demands these things and makes this part of the national agenda. You know, that we want more money in healthcare. You know, we don't need to do berniaga to make it a commercial thing. That people's health comes first. You know, and I have faith in the Ministry of Health. I think you give them the money. I think their heart's in the right place. People are still staying on there. I have a lot of friends who stayed on till they retired. And they stayed on because they wanted to serve. There are doctors who want to serve, many of them, but they're not being supported. So I think as a society, we've got to fight for the healthcare, public healthcare system. But there are good people there. They give them the money, I think, to do a proper job. And Sunita, you asked about climate crisis, whether it be a leveler. No, I don't think so, I think the poor will always suffer more when there's any crisis. Because they tend to build their houses in the lower lying areas. Their houses are less strong, more flimsy. So any climate change will affect the poor more than the rich, And even like things like COVID, those who had money, those who had savings, were able to, sustain. But the poorer people are the ones who really, had problems with eating, they had a problem with paying their housing loans. Luckily, the government said moratorium on housing loan payments, Generally, when there's a crisis, the poor are the ones who, so it won't be a leveler. It's the other way around. It will make the rich better, Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe it's late also. We're trying to do a sum up. I think, some of the topic actually is outside the discussion on ASEAN. So I don't want to, having a long economic lecture about this. I think one of them is food securities. I have a lot of criticism on that, and even healthcare, but that's a bit out of the next topic. But for us to move forwards, and also because this is a platform of PSM, we have to start learning from historical experience. Is that despite we like to have good regulation, good regulatory mechanism to protect the people, but we also have to recognize the existence of markets. And then markets function a certain way. So the point is, how do we be a good regulator rather than trying to pretend that we can ignore the existence and the functioning of the markets? So for ASEAN, I think some of the things I would say is unrealistic to expect can be done. One of it, I think, wage regulation is unrealistic. Because we can say, or if all ASEAN, let's have a standard wage so that our factory don't move to Indonesia, so that we can keep our jobs. It's not going to happen. Indonesia is going to lower their wage and to attract our investment. You can't tell Malaysian not to reduce taxes or whatever to attract Singapore. That's what happened in Johor. We reduce company tax, we reduce free money, so people are happy because now Singaporean companies come here to set out their thing. Our Agong very happy. So that is, I think, beyond us. I mean, I don't know how many change of government you're not going to get there. So, but I think this is a time that we have to recognize what is the proper state roles in protecting the welfare and to create people-centric economy. I think one thing that we have missed out is that the state role of investment in welfare, healthcare, old age has been continuously depleted. Because every time you say that, the government turn around and say, where's the money coming from? So then they send it to economic minister, say, tengok macam mana boleh kita potong subsidi, macam mana kita boleh cut whatever. So we are being locked into this. And whenever we say, do this, they keep asking, where's the money coming from? And then a lot of our middle class will start saying, oh, we don't burden our children, we don't make the country to have high debt, and so on. I think we have to, we take another session to talk about these fake issues about burdening our
children with debt. I think that's a separate issue altogether. But I think we have to start saying that the state's role is to ensure that this aspect have heavy investment. That's your job, right? The role of trying to limit migrant workers coming in, trying to make sure our factories don't run away. I think that's a secondary state role. Main thing is create that, because it's a lot of theoretical things. Secondly, I think when we look into the new developing country, especially China, how did they catch up within 2 or 3 decades? They managed to bring people out of poverty. Again, it's investing heavily into infrastructure, welfare, and also technology, to have autonomy and to control technology. So the myth about we need to liberalize, we need to send our prime minister, our trade minister every day to fly over to New York, to all these countries, and then come back to say, I have how many 100 billions of investment. Those are bullshit, right? The money is here among us. We have to stop thinking about we need to inject. So the whole state role of creating wealth and creating capital need a total overhaul. Again, that's a big topic for us to talk about it. But I want to confine into this. For us, we need a big change. Say that this is the 2 primary government's role in doing that, right? Okay. I want to touch a little bit about healthcare. Dr. Kumar mentioned that because you see some of the things, again, restrictions cannot help. I wrote a paper in my master thing. I say, unfortunately, I think I'm going to go against half of the people who sit here. The reason why we have brain drain is why no matter how you pour in your healthcare, you're pouring salt into the seawater. Because we speak English. Cuba is very privileged. Their doctor cannot run away. Their doctor cannot go to New York and become a surgeon. Why the brain drain is the worst? Philippines. Every doctor dream about working in London, working in New York, because they speak English. Unfortunately, that is the reality. Again, none of us is going to willing to sacrifice that to say we reverse back to only study Malay, make our doctor doesn't know how to speak English so that we can keep our brain drain away. We're not willing to do that, right? So go back to that. It's some of the things that we cannot stop. But what we have to do is investment. Again, government has to invest. So some of the things that we can see very clearly, this is the reason, but we can't do it. We can't. So back to that, I want to say that the secondary interstate, international role, which is relevant to ASEAN, I think key issues is regulatory issues that we have to in place. One is climate. I think that one, everyone must have the same standard, reducing carbon, all these things. So ASEAN as an interstate regional body, this is something that we can improve a lot more, but we haven't done it, right? So secondly, issues of human rights, that everyone can have a standard human rights, right to life, but not economic rights. I'm more focused on civil rights, rights of fair trial, right to life, right? We have to try to build a common standard, and that, of course, partly will relate to disease control. We need to make sure that all this. So that's the second regulatory mechanism that we have to build in. Third issues is, I think, instead of trying to all compete to trying to get investment, also trying to make sure that we undercut each other, we should start to talk about how to facilitate relocations of capital and investment. Some of the things we cannot help it. If we continue to this type of industry, we have to continue to bring Bangladesh in, will have to bring Indonesia in. We might as well say, okay, let's facilitate and move it to Medan, move it to Indonesia, and then see what are the things that suitable for us. But at the moment, ASEAN, even though we sit together, everyone trying to compete to get data center in, everyone trying to compete to do it. So what do? We subsidize by reducing tax, reducing all the other things. But ASEAN should sit down and understand which country is suitable for what. Some of the industry that we've gone past, we moved there. I take example from China. You started from there. The provincial government would just say, sorry, you don't need this, you move inland, because this type of industry no longer suitable. But if ASEAN can look into it and say, look, this is not suitable anymore for us, and move them out, right? And facilitate it properly, and that's where I say share prosperity. We can help them to grow. We also can grow. We also can reach certain. So that's the whole issues about building investment, and also helping our neighboring country to become high-income society will help us to our markets. So we shouldn't be so selfish that worried about, they are taking away our investment. So the last thing is slightly different. I think not so much dealing for self-sufficient, but we have to understand how the global market works, how the production works, how the labor market works, and to create better linkages. That's linkages that have more benefit to us. So to imagine that we don't need to produce food, we don't need to import food and we can produce ourselves. I think that those romantic thinking is not going to be there. But if the question is about, some of the smaller countries in Gulf states, they go to big countries and buy lands and invest in the food. And that's also part of the food security strategy. But you have a better integrated ASEAN, and we'll be having some sort of mutual interdependency. But that also can build, instead of one country in self-sufficient in all the food production, all the items, but we have an ASEAN approach to food security. So something that like this may take time, but we can do it step by step, and we definitely can achieve it. Our problem is we have been so national oriented. We always think we need to do ourselves. We need to get all the, whenever we have international meeting, our minister will come out and say, we're going to be the hub for Islamic banking. We're going to be the hub for the digital finance. We're going to be hub for AI. So you're going to be hub for everything. What do we need ASEAN? Indonesia to do what? Singapore to do what? And Philippines to do what? Every time we keep thinking, can ASEAN decide, okay, some of the things, move over to other place. We do EV instead of other things. So this ideal about we sit together and trying to relocate that has been lost, right? So end up that we are not talking to each other, despite every year we have a meeting, but in reality, when it comes to economic decision, we're trying to backstab each other. So I think that few things that I will modestly think about what we can do to improve the regional integration and to move a small snail step ahead for a more people-centric. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Tian Chua. Maybe just one more question from me. So I would just like to ask, you have mentioned about all this, it's up to them, right? It's not up to us to do the regulation. So it's these people that are going to be in the meeting to have a discussion on how we can work towards a better ASEAN. So for the youth, what ordinary people like you and me, so what can we do to kind of build class consciousness or raise some awareness in terms of the importance of ASEAN? Because right now, I feel like oftentimes youth feels very disconnected with ASEAN in general. Like we don't barely know the history of ASEAN.
Just very short.
Mhm.
We don't hope ASEAN can do everything.
Right? I mean, some of the things that, as I said, there's very limited what can do. At least now, these are the regulatory things that ASEAN can do. The rest of them, of course, in our life, we still have a lot of things to do. Join your union, become more conscious consumer, be technologically more understanding and trying to lobby our politicians to be much more smart in terms of what type of investment to create, correcting people's misperception that every time we need foreign investment, keep talking about that sort of nonsense. And also to increase our own understanding about how economy functions. I think when Bandung was formed, there's very little example about a post-colonial society. They painted a very naive pictures about how once we independent from the colonial, we can produce all these things. So all sort of things that was not so much experience after half a decade, and we see success, we see failure, and we just need to go very details into what is working, what is not working. This broad-based, very big stroke type of principle need to fine-tune. I think this part is important, right? Everyone want to protect welfare of the people. Everyone want to have a good salary. But then how do you fine-tune it? I think that's everyone's role. Not me, not Dr. Kumar, not our political parties, not our bureaucrats, but every individual of us must engage in that process.
I'll answer that question as well, and maybe just wrap up as well. You see, talking about youth, I think the youth of today, I think, are in a bad shape now. In terms of jobs, for example, even if you come out with you can't get a good job, enough contractual kind of jobs. You have a huge study loans, the cost of housing is going up, So I think it's not a good. I think what the youth and we've got to see is it doesn't need to be this way. First of all, like I just showed, our wealth in this country, the wealth we are creating, is actually a lot more than what we had in our parents' generation. We can, with the capacity of this economy and the technology, we can produce a lot of wealth. Okay, that's the first point. The issue now is how is the wealth being distributed? And that is the problem now. The distribution is very poor. So I think that is what we got to keep in mind. This will be much better than this. Problem is the governments we have in place are stuck in that kind of thinking. So we got a problem with our governments who have been brainwashed by World Bank, and the idea that the market knows best. Leave it to the market. The more you push for GDP growth, the more trade you have, the better you are, and somehow it trickle down. It doesn't work. I think the youth have got to become more political, really, and understand what is in their real interest. It is not in our interest to have ethnic-based politics that divides us. The people who divide us on ethnic-based politicking are actually doing us a disservice, because we need to get together to address the real problems. So I think we need people among the youth to talk about these kind of things, and not just, no point. Things can be done, because the capacity to produce a good life for everyone is there in terms of technology. And in fact, the wealth is there. So much, like I was saying, like 20-25% only is coming to the people. The rest is just going out. So I think this is the kind of thing that we need more understanding. We need to elect in good parties and good governments. Comes to that, I think, basically. So that's how I look at it.
Just want to close with that. Going back to ASEAN, the topic of ASEAN, I think that I'm quite optimistic actually.
that we have this 600 million, 600 million population within ASEAN. There's a lot that can be done. The only problem, and this again probably wishful thinking, we have to have more sort of like-minded thinking amongst the if not all, the few. I think that's how it's going to change. I want to hazard that, for instance, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, we're quite like-minded. I want to hazard that. Now, we may have more common goals, common values than the rest. I mean, countries like the Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, they're good people, but somehow they are trapped with geopolitical issues, having to align with China or the other side. But I think as far as the four countries, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, we're quite still independent. I mean, there are some local political issues and whatnot, but now if the four countries can pioneer the ideas that we have discussed today, I think there's a lot can be done. That's how I see the future will be. Somehow I'm also saying that we have to actually get rid of people who are different. I mean, who have more self-interest. I mean, within their countries, and it's so strategic, this ASEAN, that we should not just let it be being ravished by some parties. It's got to be safe. It's got to be developed. How are we going to do it? I'm not sure. It's quite wishful thinking, but let's hope that somehow we can get there. That's how I would want to proceed. Thank you very much.
So I like how you pointed out that we have to get rid of different-minded people. That means we have to destroy the system itself. Okay, so to wrap up, what a rich conversation we've had tonight. Big thanks to all of the speakers for sharing their insights today. We've touched on some really important stuff, from food security to climate change and what we can do as ASEAN, which is ASEAN has to sit down together and rethink or reevaluate of the existing policies and redesign the whole thing to have this people-centric process. Yeah. So, and as young people, our role is not just to critique, we have to also keep educating among us. And we have to also think of the alternatives and also organize across borders. So on behalf of Parti Sosialis Malaysia, I'd like to thank everyone here for spending time on a Friday night with us. And I hope that this conversation doesn't stop here. We have to talk about it more, be it online, whatever spaces, and yeah. Thank you everyone. So I'd like to call upon Saudari Sivaranjani to give token of appreciation to all the speakers tonight.